Hey, everybody, welcome to today's episode of The Suspense is Killing Me. Today we have the joy of interviewing Casey Grifant. How are you, Casey?
I'm great. Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, I am so excited because we've got Shrouded Horror, Tales of the Uncanny. And I've been sitting in this wonderful collection all week, and I'm just so excited because you pulled me into a collection for the first time in months.
Hmm.
I've been in like novel land, just running around these broad landscapes. And going into your collection was like a breath of fresh air, and it's been so much fun. So I can't wait
Oh,
to,
I'm glad to hear that.
yeah, I can't wait to unpack it a bit. So how are you doing? How's life? Everything's good?
Pretty good. Yeah, I'm busy. We had StokerCon a few weeks ago here in San Diego, so I'm catching up now on all my other projects.
Yeah.
But it's good. It's all good.
Well, and you had a pretty distinct and unique role for StokerCon this year, right?
Did I was one of the local co-chairs along with Dennis Crosby and Sarah Faxon. So the three of us were kind of boots on the ground, the San Diego co-organizers. So it was great. It was a lot of work organizing such a big con, but I think overall people seemed to have a really great time. So that was really gratifying, and I'm happy with how it turned out.
I thought it was phenomenal just as an attendee. And not just saying that because, we're talking, but like I came back from that event and I said, wow, like I'd
Mm.
never been to San Diego, first of all, which is odd for someone that's in a naval service, Coast
Oh,
Guard or Navy, like to not go to San Diego is kind of weird, but I had never been there. And I really enjoyed it. But it could have been like one of those situations where you really enjoy San Diego, but the con doesn't go well. And it wasn't
uh-huh.
that at all. It was fantastic. I thought the con was so well organized and so well managed, and the location was beautiful. I mean, being able to be outdoors for a lot of the event was excellent.
Yeah, the hotel, the Marriott, they were such a great partner. Honestly, that made such a big difference, right? Because you have so many changes in the moment, like so many things dating. They were great. The location, as you say, with the outdoor space worked out. And it was a good size. Like we pretty much took over the hotel that weekend, which was nice. And StokerCon has always been one of my favorite annual conferences just because the vibe is so good. People
Yeah.
are so friendly. I always make new friends, catch up with old friends. It is my favorite con aside from San Diego Comic Con. Those are my two top ones.
Nice. Yeah, and I mean, to me, this was my second StokerCon, so I don't
Mm.
have a whole lot of like back history with StokerCon outside of the Pittsburgh event. And I thought it was just again, it was just very professionally executed. I didn't feel uh, in any way, shape, or form like all the people were cool and the place was cool,
Mhm.
but that the event felt clunky or any of that. It felt seamless. Everything seemed to go really well. The outdoor vibes there were just so fantastic. I mean, I don't know what deal you guys struck with the devil in San Diego, but like the weather's phenomenal and you guys were able to like capitalize on that for the event. And I thought it was fantastic.
Oh, thank you. We call it the sunshine tax here because it's so expensive, right?
Yeah.
As I'm sure you saw, everything is very pricey, but the upside is our weather tends to be very nice.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, the event was great. So, are you attending StokerCon next year?
Yes, for sure. The model of organizing is interesting, right? I pass the baton on to the next local organizer,
Yeah.
so I'm not working it or behind the scenes at all. I will just be attending as an attendee, which will be nice,
Yeah.
relaxing,
A little less stressful this year.
hopefully.
And you had mentioned another conference there. You said Comic Con in San Diego, right?
Yes, yes.
So,
Comic Con is, I don't know if you know, but it's one of the largest, if not the largest, Comic Cons in the world. And I want to say it was maybe the first one as well.
wow.
So it's sort of renowned for being the Comic Con. And
The one in San Diego is?
that's right. Yes.
Okay.
And it's every year in July. All the Hollywood studios come in. It's 4.5 days. The entire downtown is transformed.
Wow.
It's so fun. Not only do you have, tons of panels and events, but there's also all of these off-site structures that are created, right? So FX, Fox, all the major networks will build these kind of offsite experiences that are
Wow.
really fun. It's like a playground, like for adults and kids, right?
That's awesome.
It's so fun.
Now, so you've been going, do you go to this every year or is like this is
Yes,
your,
that's right.
how many years have you attended?
I have been in San Diego about 9 years, so I would say
Wow.
9 years. And
Excellent.
yeah, it's great. There's a lot of professional networking as well. We actually usually do kind of an unofficial Horror Writers Association meetup that the San Diego chapter here will organize. So anybody visiting who's an HWA member can come and have a happy hour and hang out for a bit.
Excellent.
Sometimes I'm on panels. I've been pitching Weird West panels, so I'll have one this year. So it's a lot of fun.
That's so cool. So if anyone listening to this ends up at Comic-Con in San Diego, reach out through the HWA to find out about where all the cool HWA things are happening. Man, that's I'm gonna have to like put that on my calendar for future years to figure out like how do I get back to San Diego for Comic-Con because it just sounds like it's such a cool time. A friend of mine actually is well, a couple of friends of mine are involved in writing and publishing comic books.
Oh, nice.
So this might I might get kicked in the shins by them for not going in the future if they're the types that jump on a plane every year to go out there for the big one.
Yeah, and just for context, it's like over 100,000 people who go to Comic Con.
Wow.
It is massive. It's a bit overwhelming, would be an understatement, but
Wow.
it's worth it. It's a lot of fun.
So do you sell books there as well? Or they're like vendor?
There are tables. It's pretty competitive to get a table or booth. Typically, if you're doing a panel, you can have a signing as well. So that's usually the way to kind of share word about your books.
Mm.
But there's just so much random activity. Like you'll be walking down the street and you'll see like a parade of superheroes walk by, and just lots of fun discovery moments like that.
That is awesome. And you had mentioned kind of weird West, right? Like
Mhm.
are you specifically talking about that at the panel, like that topic of
That's right.
weird West kind of fiction?
Yes, it's a
Wow.
topic I've been pitching to cons just generally because it's a pretty underrepresented genre, right? Weird West is speculative fiction combined with old westerns, essentially. Whether it's fantasy, sci-fi, or horror merged with the old west aesthetic or setting. So I had one at Comic Con last year. We had one at StokerCon this year and last year, and then we'll have one at Comic Con again this year. So I always try to pitch it to get the word out just about weird westerns. And um, it seems like there's been a little bit of a resurgence in the
Mm.
genre. There's a lot of diverse weird westerns that have been published in the last few years, and people seem really interested in the genre again. I think for a lot of reasons.
I attended that panel at StokerCon.
Oh, nice.
So I'm fanboying a little bit right now because I got to see you up on the panel. It was it was so cool. I was like, wow, this is a and it was I was like one of those people that's sitting there going, I want to ask 500 questions. But I guess I'll just have to wait until I can get Casey on my podcast and do it
There you
there.
go.
so so one of the things that occurred to me during the podcast during your panel, which by the way, if you guys have never dove into um, kind of the Western elements of horror, I mean, it's just such a ripe landscape and aesthetic for horror. It is kind of shocking that there aren't more authors leaning into that, especially from the
Mhm.
Western parts of the country. But I think some people just take it for granted, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
That's just my opinion is it's their normal environment, so they don't think it's that different from what a lot of other people are experiencing. But I have family out in New Mexico. I was actually born in Albuquerque, which is the
Oh,
weirdest thing because
oh.
I was only there for like 18 months and then gone again.
Mm.
But I have family out there, and we always joked around coming from the East Coast to going out to the West. We'd say it's like being on another planet, you know.
Mhm.
And if you go into there's so many different environments in the West. I mean, New Mexico doesn't look
Mhm.
like Arizona, doesn't look like California. I mean, there's like all these different types of landscapes that you could pull from, and it feels so spiritual and it feels
Mhm.
so kind of magical and unique and untouched in so many ways. So immediately when I was at the panel, I was like, Um, I don't hear people talk a lot about the spirituality of the
Mm.
desert and these
Uh-huh.
open spaces. And it seems like it's such a like a fertile ground for horror.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. So I grew up on the East Coast, and when I moved to California about 9 years ago, I was struck by the landscape that you mentioned, right? It looks so unlike anywhere else. You have the desert, you have the mountains, it's the air is different, right? That's when I actually started writing weird westerns. It
Mm,
was because of the landscape. It felt, as you say, magical in a sense, just
yeah,
different, kind of awe-inspiring, right? And you
yeah,
do hear a lot of people going into the desert, camping, and they just have these moments, right? The galaxy, you can see the galaxy above you. You're alone. There's interesting kind of animals and vegetation, and it almost feels like you're on a different planet, which is, just a cool experience.
yeah. I love it. I feel that inspiration, and I think that that's for someone that's not seeking that. That's a sign, right? That there's
Mhm.
something so strong about that place or those places that really is ripe for exercising these types of stories. I had a book coaching client for a little while, almost more like a let's dream up your storylines and kind of refine your story kind of client. And she was writing about in a Western setting, and it was funny to me because I felt like when you're handling a story in an area like the West, it's almost like you have to pull every bit of boundary down around you that a
Hmm.
lot of other environments naturally build up. So, for
Hmm.
example, like you and I are both originally East Coasters,
Uh-huh.
and we've both lived in New York City,
Hmm.
and that place has its own flavor and everything, but there's some very clear boundaries, physical
Hmm.
boundaries to living in a place like Manhattan. Which, by the way, I lived in Governor's Island, just off the southern tip of Manhattan.
Okay, all right. I was in West Harlem.
Right.
Um, yeah, and those buildings there's nothing quite like living in that.
Yeah.
It's like the opposite,
Yep.
right, of the Southwest. You have the boundaries
Yeah.
everywhere, and it's awe-inspiring in a different way.
Right. And then the connection to water is so
Mm.
different.
Mhm.
We have a different type of dependency on bodies of water in the East than
Mm.
the West does. In the West, it's more like almost like a matter of life and death, and in the East, it's like a matter of commerce and other things. It's just so wild to me. So, as someone who's so well focused and educated and experienced in Wild West kind of, I hate to say Wild West, but it is, Western horror and Western fiction. What is it that keeps like pulling you back to that?
Mm.
Like, is there just like this kind of enduring, like when I think about like some of the threads that connect us as authors to our stories, or as readers to different authors, or readers to different types of stories or series, always think about Stephen King's The Dark Tower, and like we're all riding the beam. I think you find the beam that's like yours and you kind of ride it, and you're just eventually you'll get to the Dark Tower, right? But like we're like riding the beam. It seems like you found this really cool vibe to kind of stay with for a bit. Is there something like unique about that to you?
Yeah, I think so. It's funny because I was never really into westerns growing up, right? They were very kind of macho, and
Yeah.
the women characters were always prostitutes with a heart of gold,
Mm.
or the love interest. So I had no interest in westerns. It wasn't until I moved to California and I actually started playing a card game here called Doomtown,
Oh,
which is based on the Deadlands universe that some people might be familiar with. But what drew me into that was seeing a lot of women characters on the cards who were they were lawmakers, they were outlaws, they were all these different roles, and I hadn't really seen that in a Western setting. So it really captured my interest, and I actually started writing official games for the cards. Me and my partner, we became pretty involved in the gaming community and just connected with the writers. So I wrote some official stories, and I wanted more. So I thought I'm going to make my own Weird West universe and kind of
nice.
build this world. So I created this story about a stoic gunslinger and her partner, so Melinda and Lance. Melinda, I really wanted to be kind of a gender swapped, like stoic cowboy archetype. And then Lance is her kind of charming, charismatic partner. And they roam around exterminating monsters in a version of the Southwest in the 1800s, where basically a rupture in the land released all these monsters, right? So kind of disrupted
Nice.
history as we know it. So it's not our history, it's a little different. I don't really use like city names or anything that we know. It's kind of a parallel world, which is really fun. It's a really fun area to play in. And I started with short stories of them fighting different monsters, right? So like episodes, and those were published in magazines and anthologies. And then I thought, well, I guess I could try a novel. People seem to enjoy the story. So I wrote the first novel, which came out last year, um, Melinda West Monster Gunslinger from Bridges Gate Press. And it was well received. People seem to really enjoy it. So the second one comes out next year, Melinda West and the Gremlin Queen. And they're meant to be somewhat standalone, interconnected series, right? So I don't end on a cliffhanger where you have to read the next one. I want each one to be somewhat standalone.
Right. Well, I'm glad you brought up Melinda West, Monster Gunslinger, because that's a novel's worth of material built around this same world we've kind of been discussing a little bit. But I was going to ask you what exactly inspired you to create a novel, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
is it and what are your kind of like your influences for that world? Is it? I think a lot of people when they hear weird western, they're like, "Oh, is it like horror sci-fi mixed?" And
Mm-hmm.
then they might think Lovecraft, right? Like just as far as like that kind of science fiction monster kind of element. Can you unpack the universe of Melinda West just a little bit to kind of give us an idea of
Yeah,
what the feel is?
sure, sure. I think of it as kind of fantasy horror western. So um, it's not what's called a splatter western, which is kind of the really extreme graphic horror westerns that are having a pretty big moment and are very popular, and they're great for what they need to be. But I don't really write graphic horror. I don't want horror that stresses me out and leaves me like deeply unhappy.
Mm,
So for Melinda West, I wrote it more in the vein of say Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Um, or Jonah Hex, like really more adventure horror. They are fighting monsters and the stakes are very high, but generally, I want them to generally come out on top as much as they can, although they have their battle wounds.
right.
So that I would say is the flavor of it. It's really around the monsters, which for me, that's always a really fun piece of writing, just to imagine these different creations kind of based on animals in nature. There are so many just unbelievable things that animals, insects, fish can do. So I try to mix and match and try to come up with new monsters as much as possible.
Oh, that's great. And this is very different from what you have in Shrouded Horror.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, I want to make sure that I give people that distinction that even though you're very embedded in the Weird West stories and it's what you love to write and people are enjoying that work, and you're definitely getting the word out about it.
Hmm.
It's not what your collection is mostly comprised
That's
of,
right.
right? So um, when it comes to Shrouded Horror, like you're between these two weird Western novels
Hmm.
by about a year and a half, if I'm not
Yeah.
mistaken. Right dead smack in the middle drops Shrouded Horror, a collection. And as soon as I saw the collection, well, first of all, I saw your cover and I was like, ah, I love it. We were nerding out a little bit before we started recording. I was like, I'm a little bit of a nerd for covers and love the cover on this. Can you talk a little bit about the artist who did the cover work?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So the cover of Shrouded Horror is done by Luke Spooner of the Carrion House, and he does a lot of beautiful artwork. And one of his specialties is horror book covers, and he actually did the Melinda West cover as well. So for Shrouded Horror, I was thrilled when he was able to come on board, and he always nails it. Like the first version is just jaw dropping. He gets it.
Wow. So he's working with you on multiple covers across multiple publishers, which is
That's right. Yep.
love that. Love that. I'm gonna read, if you don't mind, a couple of the short story titles in the
Okay.
collection.
Sounds good.
Um, All Aboard, Terror on the Boulevard, Just Another Apocalypse, What Storms Bring, which by the way, I was like, what is happening? I was like, my mind was going in circles toward the latter two-thirds of that one. The
Mm,
Color of Friendship, not what you think it is. Lonely Arcade, The Sighting, The U Train, The Perfect Gift, Unrest. You can see that this is not a weird Western focused
mhm.
collection.
Right.
There is a lot of connection to the sea in, and well, I should say bodies of water in the stories that I've read, even with the storm, right? Like the
Mm,
what storms bring has this like imminent hurricane that's gonna
Superstar.
basically
Yep.
dominate the storyline.
And that one I wrote immediately after the superstorm in Boston when I lived there. So that was the inspiration for that. Just a very strange feeling in the air, this, impending disaster kind of on the way, and what
Wow.
that might be like in this character's situation.
So when it comes to creating a well, for you as the author of this collection, right? This is kind of, to me, collections are a very unique opportunity for an author to put together a very well curated uh, assembly of their books or short stories, sorry,
Mm-hmm.
that are kind of like a gift to the readers. Like, hey, here's a little insight into some of my shorter work that really speaks a certain way about what I do and who I am as a writer. Check this out, right? It's like almost like there's a lot of authors who are like, oh, I've published all these novels or I published all these series, and then I'll drop a collection in the middle, and it's like my project. It's something I get to do that's a little bit more personal. And I've even had some friends that do collections. They're like, this collection's for me. Like,
Mm,
if it
yeah.
does great, that's fantastic. But if it does nothing, I'm okay with that because I kind of
Mhm.
published it because I wanted to get these stories out there and they're unique.
Mm.
Can you tell me a little bit about what your thoughts and feelings and experience have been with putting together this particular collection, and if any of that resonates with that experience?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is my first collection, and it was an interesting exercise to pick like which short stories would be in it, right? And it's a mix of reprints and also original stories. And in putting it together, you reflect on, well, what are the themes that may be connected? Why am I picking the stories that I'm picking for this? And it's a very interesting self reflection, right?
Mm.
Because you kind of think about yourself as an author in the stage, what are you writing and why? So for this particular collection, I was focused on my stories that are more about like what is lingering just outside of reality. So in the majority of them, it's kind of a normal situation, right? But something strange happens. There is obviously some room for flexibility there. So a few are kind of near future. But generally, it's about everyday people dealing with something, monstrous or unknown, and how they confront it, how they overcome it, or how they fail to overcome it. So that's kind of the general gist, and that's also where the name comes from, Shrouded Horror, right? Kind of these horrors on the periphery, which is also reflected in the cover, where you see a human figure and then all of these monsters behind her, and we're not sure if she knows the monsters are there, if she doesn't care that they're there. We're not quite sure what's going on. So that's sort of the overall gist.
I love it. And I like that you mentioned that some of these had been previously published and some not. And I think that the opportunity to kind of put some previously unpublished work in a collection like this, rather than spend a significant amount of energy shopping each one of them
Mm,
individually to separate publications, is a really cool opportunity for you to kind of clean the slate and get that work out there. And you're able to do it with a publisher.
mhm,
In a different format than, say, putting each one of those short stories in an anthology. With this one, it's published by Dragon's Roost Press, right?
that's right.
So what was the situation like when it came to presenting Dragon's Roost with the idea of doing a collection?
Hmm.
Was it a different process than if, say, you were bringing them a novel? Were they openly shopping and you said, "Hey, I've got this collection"? Like how did that kind of work out?
Yeah, actually, I had been pitching the collection kind of broadly. I got a few, close but not quite, for whatever reason they were
Hmm.
booked up or couldn't take it on. So I met Michael, who's the head of Dragon's Roost Press, at StokerCon last year in a pitch session. And for those who don't know, StokerCon offers attendees to do pitches with agents that are there. It's kind of first come, first serve sign up, but it's great because you get to meet either agents or publishers who are looking for stories. So I chatted with Michael, and he was immediately interested in kind of these cosmic feminist horror tales. And that's how it started. So about a year ago.
Wow, that's great. And was this how long have you been planning the collection? Was this something you've kind of, I mean, obviously you had your hands full with Melinda West for a while, and
Mhm.
that just published in 2023, so we're not very far from that whole experience, plus the launch, plus the post-launch fun that comes along with
Right, right.
a well-received book like that, because Melinda West has done good things for you.
Mhm.
So how long have you been planning Shrouded Horror?
I've had it kind of in the mix, I would say, for maybe the last 2 or 3 years. It's funny, once I moved to San Diego, I became very serious about like really writing and publishing. And I had been a writer my whole life, but never really kind of sat down and churned out stories. But when I got to San Diego, I co-founded the Horror Writers Association chapter here. I wanted to really build a community. And I actually self identified as a horror writer for the first time. And that made a world of difference because before I thought of myself as sci fi, kind of dark fantasy, but I had never really found a group of writers that I clicked with.
Ah,
So finding horror writers in San Diego just really helped me motivate. And one of my writer friends, Donna Monroe, she's not in San Diego, but we had met through a conference. She runs a weekly flash writing, not really a contest, but an exercise. So I started writing short stories every week. And it is such a great exercise
oh,
because, some of them you throw away, they're not salvageable, but most of them you can do something with. And it's a great way to hone the craft. And short story writing is so different than novel writing, right? It's
yes.
like completely different, but so worth doing. So anyway, I churned out a lot of stories, improved, started getting traction with getting published in anthologies, magazines. And then I thought, okay, I have enough now to put it into a collection and to see if, I can do anything with that.
I love that you brought up the difference between writing short stories and longer works, like long fiction, like novellas and novels, because I think that we exercise, like any other thing that we do. If you're working out a certain way, your body acclimates and
Mhm.
adjusts to what you're doing. Your brain does the same thing, I think, with writing. At least in my experience, it has. And I feel like my short story muscles have atrophied significantly since I was younger. I think when I was younger, I could just whip out short stories, and they were really cool. And I bet you I could go back now and unearth some of those and breathe some
Mhm.
maturity as an author into them, that clearly I couldn't have had when I was 15, or even like 18. And they would be much better. But I don't know that I could sit down and write any of those today the way I did back then, because I think I had a much stronger sense of short story writing, and I
Mm.
was reading a lot of short stories then. Um, I, I, Today, if you challenged me to sit down and write a short story, especially flash fiction, it'd be far more challenging for me than, uh, like, say, plotting out a novella.
Mm. Mhm.
Um, I mean, it's not just about like limited real estate, because I feel like when you're writing short stories, and you're reading short stories, you are expecting that kind of quick action, quick
Yep.
move. You're not going to have a lot of time for a deep dive into character, and that's fine. But it's still really hard to fit all the action you need to tell that complete short story in that small amount of words. I don't care how efficient you are with your writing, there's a craft to getting the
Mm,
story in that space. Knowing where to start it and where to end it and how deep to go with each of the characters that are involved. You have some short stories that have 5 and 6 characters in them.
mm,
And that's, I mean, I was reading one of them this morning and I was like, wow, so we started out and it was like a list of 5 or 6 young women. And I was like, that's like, how is she going to pull this one off? And you did it. You did great with it. But I just want to kind of acknowledge and give you credit for that because it's not as easy as it sounds. I think for people that don't write it, they may assume that writing shorter stories would be easier. That's
mhm.
not necessarily true. Do you find that you have kind of a similar experience with that, or am I off in left field?
Yeah, no, for sure. I think a funny thing happened where in grad school, I went to grad school for science journalism, and journalism is all about brevity, right? You
Mm,
get right to the point, you have limited word space. So I got in that mindset for a while, and that's when I started really looking at short stories and how can I tell a story in 200 words, 500 words, 1,000 words, right?
mm,
But then once I was in that mode, I actually had a hard time going back to novel writing
right.
because it's the opposite, right? You're really sinking in. You want to slow down some of the moments and really be in the environment. So sometimes that switch between the two is not easy, but I really strongly encourage novel writers, long form writers to try short stories because it's such a good exercise. And then also from just like your author branding standpoint, you could write short stories about side characters, right? And
Mm,
get those in anthologies, and that opens up a new potential audience for you, right? So I think it's
wow.
super valuable to write a few, hone the craft at least somewhat. It is very different, but it's also very rewarding.
Okay.
You get that really satisfying sense of completion much faster than
Yes.
you do with a novel, right? You can get that in a weekend. You finish a story, and it's you feel better about yourself as a writer because you've finished a story.
Well, I get that same sense as a reader of short stories.
Mm.
I hate to say it, but I'm like I can sit down with your collection and I'm like, okay, I'm going to actually check a story off. Like before I get out of this chair. Like this is great because I mean, you could see the stacks just like every other person that's either watching or listening to this. You've got the TBR from Hell
Oh, yeah.
going, right? Big shout out to Wendy for that one. And it's it's nice to be able to open a short story collection and achieve uh, enjoy a story in short order.
Mhm.
You said something that I'd like to just open up just a little bit because I thought it was such a great observation. When writing short stories, you've got this brevity involved. When I think of brevity outside of word count, I think of time, right?
Mm.
So my relationship with time when I'm writing a story is real. Like I'm very aware of how much time
Mm.
I'm spanning in a story. Most of my stories, whether novella or novel length, they're only about a week or two long,
Mm.
right? But I've got a week or two to play with. If I told you to sit in one spot and do nothing for a week, that's not that's not going to happen, right? It's a lot more time than it sounds like when you say tell me a story about what happens in someone's life in a week. I mean, I can think back on every movie I've ever watched. They're all pretty short
Mm.
time periods.
Yeah.
And that's essentially long fiction. With a short story, it seems like, we're talking a matter of hours. We're
Mm.
talking a matter of like maybe 1 or 2 days at most in a lot of the short stories. And do you think about that relevance of time when you're writing a story for a short story? I'm asking you as someone who's much more skilled at this than I am. If that's a ridiculous question, just say, dude, that's crazy. It's like,
I think within the stories, yes. Like I think of it as moments, right? What are
mhm,
the key moments, regardless of the time span within the story? But you're right. Most short stories, they are, a day, a few days, a few hours, but not all of them. Some do span longer. But it really is about those key moments and bringing them up to the light, right? Almost like a gem. You're polishing like that moment, you're showcasing that moment
mm,
versus a novel where you have many moments, peaks and valleys, right? It's
yeah.
that's how I think about the short stories. And, you have a handful, maybe two or three of these moments that you're showcasing to show what kind of journey the character is going on.
Right. I think that's a second tier gift to the reader. Not only do I get to spend more time with the character that you may have, like you were saying, you could take a character from a long fiction
Mm,
and leverage that for short story, and it gives the reader more of the character they want in a bite-sized product. But it is also kind of like a special date with that
mhm.
character. It's like if I could just spend 1 hour with Roland Deschain. Like, what would that be like, right? Or
Right.
with the father from Pet Cemetery. Now, I don't want to spend an hour with him. We're good. Um, but but I love that you bring that up. As a reader, you can really just have this special moment in time with this special character, and it makes it special because that's all you get. That's it. That's it.
Yeah, and with an author too, right? Like you can take a side character from your story that you would never write a novel on, but you can have more time with them in a short story or, novelette and really explore what they're doing, outside of the novel.
Right. Ah, love it. Love it. Love it. Love it. Love it. Um, okay. So let's talk a little bit about music. So you and I discussed briefly the connection that is kind of prevalent on the show with music and writing. Some authors they can't listen to music while they write. Some authors can listen to music without words while they write. The words get in their head while they're trying to write, and it's a distraction. Others can blast whatever, and they're just in the groove. And I kind of fall into that latter
Yeah, me too.
category, but it does have a tremendous impact on how I'm writing. So I have to be really careful about what music I listen to while I'm writing. And it's less about what they're saying, it's more about how I'm feeling based on the music. So whatever emotion that music evokes in me ends up coming out in the story. So it doesn't make sense to just put it on a random playlist. So how does this work for you? I mean, you've mentioned to me that music does have an influence on your writing. Do you use music as leverage, as a tool to help you with your writing? Is it just something you have to focus? Like, how does this work for you?
Yeah, I would say both. So I definitely also fall into the latter where usually I need to be listening to music to write. And I can't listen to music without words. Like I find that very distracting.
Hmm.
So all of my music is, it's pop, it's hip hop, it's a mix, just a little bit of everything. And it really is about, as you referenced, the mood the music evokes, right? So, and it might not make sense to anyone else, right? But a specific song may evoke images in your mind or just a feeling, nostalgia. So I have these random playlists, and I'm not like, I don't have to listen to the same playlist every time I write, a
That's a
specific
thing.
story, which I totally get. But
Yeah.
for me, it's more, I don't know, it's a little fluid. I do have specific like writing playlists, which have maybe 100 songs, and it just kind of helps me get in the zone. Um, there was something Stephen Graham Jones said in a book interview that I love, where he said he listens to music when he writes, but he said his playlist will have like such random stuff on it that anybody looking at it from the outside will like not understand and say, "What kind of playlist is this? It doesn't make sense." So I totally feel that it's a random playlist. It wouldn't make sense to anyone else, right? It's not like I'm writing a horror story, so I need scary music. It's not that kind of one to one.
Right.
Yeah, it's
Oh, see.
interesting.
So you and I are definitely immersive when it comes to the music, but we have a totally different
Hmm.
application. I love that. And I'm actually thrilled to hear you say that you have to have words in the music when you listen to it, because a lot of times that is a barrier, like I mentioned before.
Hmm.
And that's the first time I've heard someone say they have to have music with words in it, or music without words. It becomes an interference.
Yeah,
That is fascinating.
that's strange.
So if you like could thank one musician for their contribution to Melinda West, is there like so like when I write a book sometimes I keep getting pulled back. Like you had mentioned, like some people have a playlist. I don't intentionally build a playlist to write a story, but sometimes I'll just find that the timing, the feel, the everything is kind of just perfect.
Mhm.
And I'm like, man, I can't wait to hear that song again tomorrow when I'm writing the next chapter. And that will end up being like my
Mm.
go to starting song for the next thing I'm writing. Then there's other times when I'm like, no, this chapter is not that dark. If I start with that, we're going to be in trouble. So, are there certain like artists? Maybe you had mentioned pop and hip hop. Are there certain artists that you prefer over others when you're writing?
Not generally, but for the Westerns, I do have a specific playlist to try to get in that mindset a little more. So that is the one exception where I'm like, okay, I need to
Gotcha.
get in this more kind of historic, kind of, not quite country music, but
Hmm.
just different. So, for example, like there's a few songs by Johnny Cash on that playlist, right?
Right.
And then it's again a variety. There's some like alt rock, and it's just the vibe, which,
Oh, there's so much desert rock out there.
yeah,
Yeah, you could get lost. Like you could just put like Fugazi on and write and just be in like this weird. You want to talk about some weird western? I
yeah.
bet that would do it for you. Excellent. I love hearing that. Now, did you find that connection later as a writer, or was that something that kind of like you were always with? So, for example, when Brian Bowyer was on the show and he and I were nerding out about the influence of thrash metal on our writing and on our youth and all that stuff, the music was actually more core to our upbringing first. Um, when it came to like expression, we both play guitar. We both, have a real strong connection with music as musicians and not just um, as listeners. But I think that even people that don't play instruments, like
Mhm.
music is so influential. Did you like have a connection with music early in your writing as well, or did that inspire you to write? Or
Yeah, I always loved music, but I am a terrible musician. I tried so hard. Piano, violin, like whatever, I couldn't read it, couldn't really, like, I
yeah.
don't know if I'm somewhat tone deaf, but could not do music for the life of me. But I so appreciate it. And
Mm.
I am one of those people, I need to listen to music every day or I start to feel really antsy. Like in the car driving, I will never listen to the news or talk show. I need the music.
Oh,
So yeah, it's always been a big part of just what I enjoy. And writing, I feel like, has been somewhat separate growing up. Like I've always liked writing as well. And I don't think it was until I hit the spot of really, really being disciplined about writing that music
mm.
helped kind of ground me and focus me.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, cool. Well, that's you know all very. I love to hear that you have to touch the music every day.
Yeah.
Like
Oh,
it's
for
like
sure.
because sometimes wonder if that's healthier or not for me.
Mhm.
Because of the music I listen to is pretty emotional stuff. And there's
Mhm.
times when I'm like, yeah, if I do this every day, we're gonna be like, just bring my cloud with me everywhere I go, and I'll just write everywhere and listen to stuff, and then take my cloud and I'll leave. But there's times when I'm like listening to some of my more amped stuff, and I'll get home and my kids are like, dude, go back to wherever you just came from. Like you're just like you're a little bit much right now, man. I'm like, come on, we gotta live. So I love that you're in touch with that. You're able to control it because some
Mhm.
of us are just victims of the music. All right, um, so we talked a little bit before we came live about good books that we've read lately. I had mentioned how much I loved Mary from Nat Cassidy, and he was kind of like that was my first book of his I'd read. I'd met Nat at I want to say it was Halloween Hangover 23 in Richmond at the Barnes and Noble there in Libby Place, and I got a signed copy of Nestlings from him.
Mhm.
And I didn't want to tell Nat at that point that that was my first Nat Cassidy book. And I was like, "Hey, nice to meet you, Mr. Cassidy. Can I get a copy of your book?" And he's like, "Hey, here you go, kid." And it wasn't really like that. He was like, super cool, and we were having a blast nerding out about his cover art because he is a Manhattan resident,
Oh,
or not a resident. I think he lives in Queens, but
okay.
he's a New York City based author. He was raised initially in Arizona.
Oh. Interesting.
And so when I picked up Nestlings, I put it back down. I said, well, maybe I shouldn't read this just yet. I should probably read Mary first. They're not related. It's not a series as far as
Mhm.
like connectivity or interdependence. But I wanted to get a taste of his earlier publication before I went to his next publication. So I read Mary and I was blown away by it. And it is so set in the West. Like it's in Arizona, and he pulls the desert into the story and all the things. And so immediately, when I was thinking about recent reads that were great for this conversation, I thought of Mary,
Mm.
and it's just such a great story. So I'll start the book recs with, if you guys haven't checked out Mary from Nat Cassidy, I think it's a really great place to start if you want to see someone that's um, playing the game at a high level. And as I mentioned before, I think Nat started writing that, and this is in his author notes as well. I think he started writing it when he was like 13 or something crazy. He's
Oh,
been, yeah, the story's been gestating for like decades. So,
wow.
what about you? Have you read anything recently that, it doesn't have to be West related, but just anything that you want to share with the audience?
Yeah, I've kind of in the vein, I think, of feminist horror and horror collections. I've read a few recently I really loved. One is Rebecca Rowland's White Trash and Recycled Nightmares,
Oh,
which
love that
is
title.
it's such a great title. It's short stories, horror, and the kind of horror where it's similar to mine in that it's not super graphic, but it gets under your skin. I would read them before bed and I had to stop because it was like, oh no, I don't want to go to sleep with this image. But a lot of the endings had a really nice twist, which I always enjoy. So that one I love. Tiffany Brown has a collection called How Lovely to Be a Woman, which is short stories and poems, feminist horror. There's one about a mom and a baby that is not what you expect. And that one really stayed with me. That's a great collection as well. And then my third rec is actually a novel. It's called Good Girls Don't Die by Christina Henry, and that was such a page turner for me. It just has this immediate mystery. It plays on tropes in a really interesting way. It's very feminist, kind of horror slash thriller. That one really stayed with me too.
Wow. I haven't read uh, I haven't read those three yet, so you just compounded my TBR strain. I'm gonna have to like pile them up. They sound fascinating. Anytime I hear about a book that says a relationship between a mother and a baby that's kind of unexpected, I immediately think of Clay Chapman. Like, what kind of mother? Um, yeah, I'll definitely check those out. We'll put links to those in the show notes. So if you guys are listening and you're curious about any of the stories we just mentioned, there will be links in the show notes. You guys can check those out. And so tell me a little bit about, kind of come back to Shrouded Horror for a moment, because we are on the eve of the release. The release comes out, it's July 11th, correct?
That's right. Yep.
Awesome. Are there any like special events or anything surrounding the launch that you can share? Or?
Yeah, I'm going to be doing my launch event at Mysterious Galaxy, which is our local independent bookstore here in San Diego. They are an amazing partner and supporter of genre fiction and indie authors. If anyone is ever in Southern California, I highly recommend you stop by their store. They were actually our official bookseller for StokerCon in San Diego, and they
Ah,
also do other events like WonderCon and Comic Con. So I am always super excited to do any events there. So I'll have my launch event there, and then we'll probably do a signing at Comic Con, fingers crossed. And then maybe have a few other events. It's funny for this book, I was so busy with StokerCon prep. I had to set aside some of the book promo prep, so I feel like
right.
I'm still catching up a bit. But it's all good. I don't want to kind of burn out doing too much,
Sure.
so I feel like a few key events is perfect.
That's great. Yeah, that's great. And so they're mysterious galaxies. Is that what you said?
Mysterious Galaxy.
Okay, excellent. Mysterious galaxy. Try and get them on there as well. Um, and then next year you've got Melinda West and the Gremlin Queen coming out, according to your website. So
That's right. Yep.
yeah,
Yep.
and that'll be on Bridget's Gate Press as well, right?
Yes, they're the ones who published the first one. Um, So that one will be coming out. I'm also working on a project I hope to announce by the end of the year tied to weird westerns that I think will be really fun. So stay tuned for that. And then I'll share with you, it's not super public yet, but I'm working on a Monster Gunslinger card game. And we're about halfway through the card game production. So hopefully
Nice.
that will come out next year. And that features cards based on the characters from my book. We hired an artist to do the illustrations. They look amazing. I'm really excited. The game mechanic is really good. It's kind of a fast, fun version of Texas Hold'em, where you get your team together and you have these superpowers. So more on that, but I'm kind of in the midst of that as well. Hopefully that will come out early next year if all goes well.
Excellent.
It should be
So
fun.
so wait a second. You got to create a game around your story.
I did,
How
and yeah,
cool.
sorry to drop that on you, but I
No,
thought,
it's great.
there's another big project that's looming, and
It's
how it came
huge.
to be is my partner, my husband, he played Magic professionally and other board games, and he had designed a card game that he sort of had on the back burner, and he had game tested it. Right, the mechanics worked well, but he never did anything with it. And I thought, well, we could give it this flavor of a weird western, which kind of fits Texas Hold'em, right, and card games. So we decided to just move forward with it, and it's coming together pretty nicely.
Nice. So, how does the production on something like that work? Do you share that with a board game company and they pick it up, or is
We're
it
actually doing it ourselves.
wow,
We'll see how it goes,
that's
but
a lot of work.
it is. But because it's a card game and it doesn't have a lot of pieces to it, right? It's really just an illustrated deck.
Yet.
We are kind of indie publishing it, so to
Gotcha.
speak. We'll do a Kickstarter and that sort of thing. So we'll see how it goes, but it's a fun experiment. It's nice to have full creative control.
Hmm.
And I think it'll be well received. Fingers crossed.
Well, when you are ready to beta test that, I would love to pick up a set.
Oh, for
And
sure.
we
Yeah.
have a really cool gaming uh, location here in Williamsburg. It's a business. They're all around um, around community gaming,
Oh,
and
nice.
so
What are they called?
I think they're called Tap and Roll.
Rock and roll. Nice.
I think that's what I. If I'm not mistaken, it's Tap and Roll. They're very new. I've been in the process of considering opening a brick and mortar bookstore, so I've been going around town looking at these new small businesses that are kind of in the adjacent industries. And my son's really into gaming, so I said,
Mm.
well, let's just stop in for a second because I'm itching to see what they're doing in there
Mhm.
and how they're utilizing their space. We walked in there and you couldn't fit another body in that
Oh,
place.
wow.
I was like, oh my gosh. And here was this corner shop, not on a main strip where you get a lot of walking traffic, kind of like you're a destination business, right?
Mhm.
Like you have to know they're there and what they're doing to really appreciate that location. And I thought, wow, if these guys can do this here,
Mm.
it just shows you the strength around the gaming community.
Oh, for sure. Local gaming communities are kind of like horror community, like the horror author communities, very
Mhm.
supportive, very friendly, just thriving. And
Right.
these local businesses really help kind of gather people together.
Well, their hours kind of threw me off at first because I saw they were open till 10 p.m. every night, like
Oh,
through the
wow.
week. And I was like, what business stays open till 10 p.m. at night in a sleepy little town like this? And then I went in and I was like, oh,
Everybody gaming. Yep.
yeah, everyone's like, we're just going to go there and game after
Mhm.
work.
Nice.
I thought, wow, what a model. But it's really cool to see people coming together around something
Mhm.
like that. And so, yeah, I'll just be sitting in the corner there with your card deck, bragging about how I've I know who created this. Yeah, super exciting stuff, and I'm really happy to see that you guys are doing that because I love to see like exploration, like outside of the bounds of the traditional way of
Mm.
handling fiction and the worlds we build. I just love that you're doing that. That's really cool, and now I'm all
Nice.
excited. I want to see this thing when it becomes a thing. So, do you have a Kickstarter developed yet, or is it coming? Or
It's coming. Yeah,
okay,
about halfway through the card designs.
Right.
So once those are all set, we'll probably do the Kickstarter. I'm
All
hoping in
right.
January once I get through these
Nice.
other writing deadlines. So that's kind of the schedule. Yeah.
All right. You guys heard that. So keep your eyes peeled on the socials right around the start of
Yeah.
the year so we can all participate in that Kickstarter. All right, cool. Well, I just I don't I don't know how to tell you like how cool this has been for me to be able to interview you after watching the panel at StokerCon and knowing how much you've done in this space that is relatively untouched. I have never interviewed an author on this show about anything Weird West, and
Hmm.
so you are our inaugural Weird West author interview, third collection on the show. I'm really enjoying Shrouded Horror. So if you guys are interested in or are big fans of collections, go pick it up. It's been very entertaining. It's been very cool. It's been imaginative. I love your characters. There's not a lot of repeat offenders in this thing. It's not like a collection of characters or stories of revolving around a single group of characters, which is awesome. And I'm loving the refresher, the palate cleanser that it's providing between these novels that I've been embedded in both reading and writing. So I'm just fascinated with the way you've approached it, and I really am so grateful that you took the time to meet with us today and share your insight, your world, your everything with our listeners. So thank you so much, Casey.
Thank you. This was a lot of fun and I really appreciate it.
Yeah. So guys, check it out. Don't forget to go July 11th, get your copy of Shrouded Horror Tales of the Uncanny. And make sure you guys keep your eyes peeled for the Kickstarter at the early part of next year and support Melinda West.
Thank you.
Go out and get the Monster Gunslinger so this way you're all primed up when Melinda West and the Gremlin Queen come out in 2025. So, all right, guys. Well, that's it for this episode. Casey, thank you so much. And we will see you guys next week.